I don't know whether those comments struck you in the way they did me, Lewis, but if I were the king, I'd have heard them with great relief while still understanding there was a long, long way to go.
There is a long way to go, Sheila. And as we were saying yesterday, I think what really is very striking and what must really, really strike fear into the hearts of the palace, and which that astounding, extraordinary, remarkable, ghostly photograph of Andrew in that car really kind of brought home yesterday, was the extent to which this story is no longer in the control of, insofar as it ever was, anyone in the palace, anyone in 10 Downing Street, and certainly not in the hands of Andrew himself. I am struck by the extent to which, I think you've called it exactly right. I think the monarchy can survive, in answer to your question. Whether it should survive is a separate question, but it can survive. But I think that what it must do in order to survive is break out of the culture of deference, which I don't think has actually served it terribly well up to now. I've been very struck, I have to say, in the last 24 hours, the extent to which we're still getting some of these briefings, on-background briefings from the palace, saying that as far as the king is concerned and the queen is concerned, it's business as usual. And that has been regurgitated by a certain fawning type of royal commentator and royal journalist. I have to say I'm surprised by that. I'm surprised that the palace would want to send out a message saying business as usual. This isn't business as usual. This can't be business as usual. It shouldn't be business as usual. We've got a senior member of the royal family having been arrested, having had his titles stripped from him. The palace never explaining why. We've got a situation where there are accusations, and it is just accusations, that the palace at various times, or parts of the palace anyway, have mounted a briefing operation against one of Andrew's accusers. That is, of course, separate to the allegations which are being investigated or that he's been arrested for. There are serious questions for the palace. This shouldn't be business as usual. It can't be.
And the whole question of what the institution itself knew. And I say the institution because clearly the king or the monarch of the moment is the head of it, the visual head of it for all of us, and the real head of it. But there is an institution around that of other people and of traditions and of practices and culture. So if the police spotlight turns on what the institution knew, both about the Epstein sex-related allegations and indeed the trade stuff as well, who knows what they're finding in these investigations? We may find out, we may not find out, depending on how the whole thing proceeds. But if that spotlight becomes any brighter, they can't ignore that either, can they? Absolutely not. Particularly when they've said they will absolutely wholeheartedly support the authorities.
Look, I think if we're looking at the kind of institutional questions that there are for the family and the institution itself, and then the institution and the family are one and the same. They are fused. That is the weird thing about having a royal family, which is your head of state. It's hard to know where one begins and the other ends. Let's leave aside the allegations and the nature of the arrest, because of course that is not for us to determine. If there is a charge, that will be for the courts to determine, and potentially eventually a jury to determine. But those questions which are particular for and peculiar for Andrew are of course separate to the institutional questions. Those institutional questions are acute. They are not being asked particularly loudly at the moment, but I think that they will come to be asked. What are those institutional questions? Well, I've already rehearsed a couple of them, but just to reiterate again, what exactly, you and I have talked about this before, let us for a moment assume that perhaps there will be further investigations into the sexual elements of the allegations of impropriety around Andrew. Andrew is almost like, the royal family are treating him at the moment like a gangrenous limb. They're trying to hack him off to protect the body as a whole. That can work to some extent, but it can't work in perpetuity. Because, of course, when he was accused of these, the allegations that have been made in both distinct areas, he, of course, was a working royal. And as a working royal, he would rarely have been alone. He would have had security detail. He would have had private secretaries. He would have had diary secretaries. And there is an institutional framework in the palace. And not once, as far as we know, has the palace even asked what that institution might have known about what Andrew may or may not have been doing. Now, it may well be that the answer to that is not very much, but you might think, Sheila, given the gravity of the allegations that have been made, and of course, Andrew continues to deny all wrongdoing, but given the gravity of the allegations that have been made over the years, you would think that they might want to ask. I would posit to you, and I'll posit to the listeners, If this were any other public institution, a government department, a leading charity, a leading British business, whatever it happened to be, the National Trust, whatever NGO, whatever it was, and there have been many allegations of sexual impropriety or whatever it happens to be, or wrongdoing, usually there would at least be some form of internal inquiry, a check on the processes, a check about who might have known what when. As far as we know, the royal family have never even asked. And if they have asked, they've never made it public.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is a tenable situation, frankly, given the scale of the public interest that there now is in this story.
I mean, even for their own protection, I can't believe they haven't looked at it. They're surely getting their ducks in a row for those eventualities, unless they really are living in the dark ages on this.
And again, there are other questions too. If we look at the questions around the provenance of the money that, of course, was paid to the Giuffre family. We talked about it the other week, the Sun reporting that much of that came from the Queen, some of it came from the current King, some of it came from a sort of whip round from the rest of the royal family. Again, the royal family have never given any public comment about this. Can that be tenable in this situation? And of course, there is his period as trade envoy, and there are questions for the royal family institutionally, and also questions for the government as well. It just feels to me, Sheila, with all of this is the water gradually sort of pressing against the dam. And it feels to me as if we're at the point where, as I say, it will burst, and it cannot be, despite the, I think, pretty bizarre briefings we've heard from the palace, business as usual for the monarchy.
I remember the day, I was just talking about it with someone earlier, I remember the day that John Major, when he was Prime Minister, announced the separation of Charles and Diana. Not the divorce, this was all pre-Panorama and all of that, but the separation of. And I was just reflecting on it, that was announced in the kind of tones I would expect a Prime Minister to use if the entire population of a city had been wiped out. It was so grave. And it was presented with great gravity. For a lot of people, it was received with great gravity. Very sad news, of course, but I'm talking gravity, like national importance. And on one level, it was nationally important, of course, but you could tell by the way it was handled at that point, and Lord knows very tragic events came afterwards, there was a clear assumption before then that the pretend nature of their marriage could continue indefinitely, and they could just be the Prince and Princess of Wales publicly and be something else entirely privately, despite whatever pressure that was building up in the individuals involved, and in an age of increasing scrutiny. And there's something of that about this phase as well, it seems to me, because the jig is up, isn't it, on not explaining things. The jig is up. And the country was way ahead of the royal family and the institution on the jig is up on the marriage in those days. And the jig is up here. They have to do things dramatically differently. And I don't think they yet see it.
I think the public is way ahead of almost all the political elites on this, Sheila. I think it's way ahead of the royal family. I think it's way ahead of the government. And I think it's way ahead of Parliament as well. And by the way, all those questions that I was just putting over the royal family, my view is if the royal family are not willing to open up and make clear an answer to the questions that I've just posited, Parliament should grow a spine and start asking. We don't just live in a constitutional monarchy, we live in a parliamentary monarchy. Parliament ultimately decides who is monarch. If you don't believe me on that, ask Edward VIII or ask James II. Ultimately, it is Parliament who decides. And if the House of Windsor isn't willing and isn't able to reckon with the idea of being reckoned with and scrutinised, well, there are other royal houses available. And, you know, I think, in answer to your point, I think you're exactly right. I think the public are way ahead on this. Look, there's a funny thing about monarchy, isn't there? It sort of relies on a bit of a confidence trick. It kind of relies on the idea that these people are both unobtainable and unknowable, and yet not entitled. We kind of know they are entitled. We know they're different from the rest of us. But the problem comes when we see for ourselves plainly and crisply that perhaps they play by different rules. When that moment is crystallized, it is a moment of danger for them. And I think the danger, the really potent and difficult thing about this whole scandal is, and it goes beyond the royal family, is the whole Epstein scandal feeds into the idea, which is now commonplace and ubiquitous, which perhaps wasn't there in the 1990s with the events that you were describing, Sheila, of a cynical, self-serving global elite who play by different rules to the rest of us, for whom scandal is always survivable. And when you have that, and it is laid bare as it is with the Andrew scandal, that is where the real moment of danger for an institution like the monarchy comes. So they have to show, in a way, as entitled as they are, that they still play by the rules. Now, you might say that the police process shows that, but they're going to have to go above and beyond that. They're going to
prove it. I mean, the King's statement was certainly a way of saying, look, we are doing that. We do follow the law. But again, that needs to be really evidenced, doesn't it?
But I think the weight of the questions, not about Andrew, but about the family and the institution and the level of cynicism that there is, or at the very least, let's put it more charitably, scepticism that there is, that the institution has behaved properly, must be answered. And if they can do that, it poses an opportunity for Charles and for his son to clean house and actually reinvent, every crisis an opportunity, to reinvent the monarchy and consolidate its standing with the public, especially the younger members of the public who are much more sceptical, and use this as an opportunity to do that. If they don't, as you say, if they ignore it and they are a little bit as the Queen was in the wake of Diana's death, the late Queen, oblivious to the public mood, to public sentiment, then that is when these things become very dangerous. And actually, he could do with the Prime Minister weighing in a little bit, giving him some advice and saying, Your Majesty, I think you're going to have to go above and beyond where you are, just as Tony Blair did.
In the way Blair and Campbell did, yeah. You mentioned that £12 million payment, and it's interesting that, you said that the understanding is that the King contribute, other members of the royal family had a kind of whip round. In the papers in particular, the immediate response to that was a source denied the King's contribution at all of any amount to the £12 million payment to Andrew. But that takes us nowhere, really, does it? It's important to say it if a source is denying it, but it doesn't tell us who the source is.
And this is the problem. Sometimes, Sheila, people in my sort of neck of our trade, political journalists, get criticised for what we call, lobby journalism, sort of unattributed briefing, off-the-record sources, and I can understand that criticism. But it is as nothing by comparison to royal journalism. Royal journalism, where the royal family, the institution overall, largely says nothing. When they do say something, it is under the most controlled conditions possible, and there is almost no accountability of the sourcing and the briefing that has taken place, which can lead to the suggestion, the allegations I've said, that the palace, or at least parts of the palace, was part of a briefing operation designed to discredit the Giuffre family. Now, again, we don't know which parts of the palace that was, if it was sort of just people around the then Prince Andrew. But that is the point. We never know, because there is so little that is ever publicly said and publicly clarified. So as I say, I think that this could be an opportunity if Charles has the imagination. Look, he waited such a long time to ascend to the throne.
And he won't want to be the Windsor. He won't want to be the Windsor that loses it.
No, of course not. He had such a long time to consider what form of kingship he wanted to cultivate. Well, my word, this is his moment to show us what kingship means in the 21st century, and it cannot be what it meant in the 20th.